This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. I'm your host, Darren McKee, and with me, as usual, is Adam Gardner.
What's up, cuboids?
We have a great show for you today. I'm going to do a review of the book Invisible Rulers by Renée DiResta. And Adam is going to look at the science of Sharknado.
That's right. I've recently gotten into the Sharknado films. The first film, Sharknado, was released in 2013 for the American TV station Sci-Fi Channel. The franchise has since produced 5 sequels for a total of 6 films. They all feature a Sharknado, which is a portmanteau of shark and tornado. Yes, that's right. A tornado with sharks in it.
Isn't it called a hurricane or a typhoon when it's over water and not a tornado?
Yes. However, in the films, the Sharknadoes go over land.
Oh, wait. Spoiler alert for everyone else, Adam.
Yes.
Now, also, I have not seen any of these, just so you know, listeners.
But they probably do refer to them as Sharknadoes when they're over water. There may be some slight meteorological issues with the film as well. I'm not necessarily going to get into all of those.
There's Sharkicane?
6 movies. There's probably more than I could fill a segment with. So it's a ridiculous concept. But the films make passing references to real events, which it suggests make this absurd concept at least a little bit plausible.
Mm-hmm.
So where can I look to investigate the science behind this film? Well, as it would turn out, there was actually a TV special that did just that. The Real Sharknado is a 2021 TV special, which aired on Discovery as part of Shark Week, which by total coincidence was around the same time as I was watching some of these films in July. So here's a description from the Discovery website. We have all seen the movies, sharks jumping into boats, circling in tornadoes, and risking their lives to attack humans. Could these shark feasts happen? Ian Ziering and Tara Reid pick up their chainsaws once again to see if a real Sharknado could happen. So I don't have Discovery or Discovery Plus or whatever, but I did manage to buy the special from the Apple Store, so I decided to watch it and maybe see if that told us anything. The special, as it mentioned, stars Ian Ziering and Tara Reid. They're the 2 stars of the Sharknado film. So Ian Ziering is probably best known as Steve Sanders from 90210. He's been in some cartoons, Biker Mice from Mars, Mighty Ducks. Tara Reid, she's in a lot of the American Pie films. I mostly remember her from Josie and the Pussycats, where she plays one of the Pussycats.
Are either of these people sharks, Adam?
No, Ian Ziering was a mouse.
Okay.
And he was a duck. But he was never a shark in anything that I'm aware of. I don't think he was in, like, Street Sharks or something.
Yet. Growth mindset.
Oh, yeah. Maybe he'll be in, like, a reboot of Street Sharks. The 2 are joined in this special by Dr. Tristan Guttridge, who the special dubs a real shark expert. He is a behavioral ecologist and wildlife presenter. He has a bachelor's in zoology and PhD in behavioral ecology. So he is a real scientist. He's the real deal. He asks the question, can Sharknadoes exist? Great question. The special then proceeds to not really answer that question. A bit frustrating. So it's a Shark Week show. So I guess it's not really about just using their cool heads to analyze facts and data. They want to put Ian and Tara in scuba gear and have them swim with sharks.
Well, that's funny.
That's what they want to do.
Nothing to do with it.
It's not really. So the claim that's being debunked is not, in fact, could a Sharknado lift a bunch of sharks out of the water, deposit them in flooded areas to attack innocent civilians, and have them fly around in the tornado itself and eat people? But instead, they answer a much more mundane question: do sharks eat people? And I think we kind of talked about that in the show at some point. So Ian goes into the water with Dr. Guttridge while Tara dives in one of those sort of metal cages they sometimes put people in to look at sharks. There are a ton of sharks in the area they're visiting, but none of them are particularly interested in attacking any humans. Many of the sharks seen in the special are actually fairly small. I think the pop culture idea is that all sharks are big like Jaws from the Jaws film, but in reality, they vary quite a bit in size, with many of them being quite small. And in this special, there are a few bigger ones, but none that look like the size of, Jaws or the ones in the Sharknado films.
Yes, but a 6-foot shark, let alone a 3-foot shark, could still cause lots of damage.
I'm sure, but they might not necessarily want to eat a human at that size, right?
Oh, correct. I don't know why. We're delicious. Wait, I've said too much.
So this is sort of the boring truth about sharks. They're usually just a type of big fish that isn't really all that menacing to a human. The ones we like to think of in particular are types like a great reef shark, great white shark, hammerhead shark, tiger shark, or mako shark. Now, I'm not going to argue that sharks are violent predators presenting a great risk, but size is surely a factor here, right? Like a cat attacks a mouse, but not a rabbit. A predator will generally not attack something past a certain size, and it wouldn't be very useful for a tiny shark to try to eat like a huge human. Like, it's probably not going to succeed.
Well, it doesn't know that, but it would.
Well, it's just
unless a human has weapons, it would easily succeed.
Yeah, well, it depends on the size of the shark, the size of the human, and other factors probably. So the point is well taken. Generally, sharks don't attack people for nothing. The most dangerous ones are generally big ones like the tiger shark or great white shark. There are hundreds of shark species and less than 10% have been known to attack a person. In 2021, there were 75 unprovoked shark attacks on the US coast. It's not zero, but it's not that common. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say that sharks attacking humans is a myth. It happens. It's just maybe less common than people think. It's not as big a fear as you maybe need to worry about. To suggest it doesn't happen or that it makes Sharknado wrong, I think is a bit silly. The behavior of sharks and humans isn't the hard to believe part about these films. A few fun tidbits from the special, which are sort of mini myths. When the shark researcher asks how tiger sharks got their name, Tara Reid says, "I know it's not the tiger having sex with the shark." So
that sounds correct.
Yeah. So funny joke. And she seems to understand it's silly. She doesn't really think that's true. No, of course, you can't have two species as different from one another as a shark and a tiger produce fertile offspring or offspring at all, even if you did manage to have them copulate somehow. I thought maybe sharks wouldn't have sex because, fish do external fertilization of eggs. So basically the eggs are outside the female's body and then they get inseminated. But it seems some fish, including sharks, do internal fertilization. But still, a shark could not get pregnant from a tiger or a tiger from a shark, conversely. In fact, even for species that are very closely related, like a tiger and a lion, the offspring, such as a liger or a zygon, will be infertile. A fish and mammal are just not even close. They're not even closely related, so they will not be making offspring. That's not how mermaids are made.
See the Little Mermaid documentary for a follow-up.
Yep. Good film. All of them. It's actually a very mundane reason for why the tiger shark has his name. It has stripes. Like a tiger. Another fun thing about this special, while scuba diving in full scuba gear, they keep talking to each other. There's like tons of dialogue. And it's like only very slightly muffled and clearly understandable on a TV show. When you're scuba diving, you can't breathe through your nose, so you can't make certain sounds. There's a scuba regulator which stops your jaw, lips, and tongue from moving normally and forming words. So your ability to talk is significantly impaired. Although sound travels well underwater, it isn't good at transmitting from one medium to another. Anyone who's tried to scream in a swimming pool or kind of knows this. You can sort of hear very faint sounds, but it's hard to make out any words. That's not really what they're suggesting here. They would suggest there's like a mic inside the scuba gear, but there's just no way this would work in the scuba gear as shown in the special. It's clearly ADR. So it's basically recorded after the show. At one point, we see Ian Ziering doing a hand signal. Evidently, their only way of communicating while there's a voiceover to that scene. This is all very silly. So this can't be trusted to bust myths when it's just making so many new ones at the same time. Right?
Is this the science of the science of Sharknado, Adam?
That's right. The science of the science of Sharknado. They do sort of look at the main silly claim of the films that a tornado could scoop up sharks, but they do it in an odd way. Instead of arguing that the tornado could lift the shark, they instead argue that for a shark to get sucked into a tornado would need to be near the surface, and they want to see what sharks do in a storm. And they say that the shark is able to detect a change in pressure which takes place prior to a storm, and then they usually go deeper into the water to avoid it. So in this case, they wouldn't be picked up by a tornado. Okay, that's not really the weird thing about the movie, but sure. Like the odd claim about the movie is not the sharks happen to be swimming a little too close to the surface of the water before the Sharknado picks them up and then sends them on to murder people. I don't know if it's murder. They're not really legal citizens of a country. Okay.
In fresh water, right?
They come out of the ocean. The first film is in California, but
I meant the sharks are in the ocean. But I assume they land in fresh water.
Oh yeah, there's flood. Yeah, there's freshwater flooding. Well, it's basically like tsunami, so maybe some of that seawater. Mm-hmm. They also say that the big sharks wouldn't be able to be picked up by a tornado, even if it were near the surface. And I will look at that later. This is the main claim, and they don't they shouldn't just discount it as a passing reference without, I don't know, give me a 3D model of a shark or something like that. 3D model of a tornado picking up a shark, something cool like that. After this, they sort of say the opposite in claiming that in some cases, a shark will trail a hurricane because the storm can bring them novel foods. So they basically say fruit, coconut, reptiles, birds, and other things get thrown in when there are hurricane conditions. So the shark would follow it and then would eat some of the cool stuff that gets dropped in the water.
It's like the opposite of the movie.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's stuff they usually wouldn't eat. So it's funny because in the movie, it mentions that basically one plot point is that the sharks in the Sharknado have birds in their stomach when they cut them open, which basically suggests that the sharks have actually been living like in the upper atmosphere or in the tornado for long amounts of time, where they're actually like just eating and living and digesting.
Digesting, yes.
Yeah. It's like, which is, anyway, the films get more ridiculous.
Yes,
as
more
they go
ridiculous. Which is almost impressive.
More
ridiculous.
ridiculous. Absolutely. So it seems odd for sharks to eat fruit. So in the special, they feed some sharks a bunch of different kinds of fruit, and they eat them. They don't eat the humans, and they eat the fruit. So that was kind of cool.
They even like pineapple on pizza.
Who wouldn't? Human pizza. The sharks do actually like Hawaiian pizza, but they have actual Hawaiians on them.
Hi-yo.
So they do some more specific myth busting. They look at how high a shark can jump out of the water or breach, because in the first film, there's a shark that jumps quite high to like eat a guy who's climbing up a rope. So they sit in a raft with a bunch of fish hanging from above them on a line, and none of the sharks jump out of the water to eat the fish. So they basically, it's like, oh, it's debunked. But then they say, oh, but a white shark or a mako can jump like 10 to 15 feet. Like, oh, so it's not a myth at all? So what's the deal here? So they can jump out of the water, but probably not as high as they're shown to jump in the movie, which is like an absurd height. So that's kind of all the special did. So I want to look at some other science behind the film, because I don't think that was particularly exhaustive. Back in 1999, I saw a film I didn't really like at the time called Magnolia in theaters. At the end of the film, I thought it was meant to be absurd. There was a rain of frogs. So I laughed at it. I was like, what's this movie trying to do? What's this movie saying? What I didn't realize at the time, this actually occurred in real life. This is a real thing. It can occur with whirlwinds and light creatures. Basically, frogs in this case can weigh just a few ounces. A water spout or watery tornado is when a whirlwind picks up water. The inside of a tornado or water spout is a low-pressure tunnel within a high-pressure cone, causing a vacuum effect at the center, picking up light objects in its path. In this case, it sucks up some water, and that includes fish, frogs, and stuff in the water. A storm can bring a water spout onto land, losing some energy and slowing down, which drops the pressure and causes some of these things to be dropped. Eventually, the storm dissipates and drops everything. Other things that have fallen from the sky due to water spouts include squids, worms, fish, with fish being the most common because, well, they're common in bodies of water, and some of them are fairly light.
Makes sense.
So David Kroll, a scientist and science communications professor and strategist at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, looked at the science behind the film and gave many such examples. He says that writer Thunder Levin, who wrote the first 4 Sharknado films, was inspired by tales of fish rain. These are mentioned in the films as a way to explain that Sharknadoes actually aren't ridiculous. Take that, viewer. This isn't absurd. You're absurd. Enjoy the movie. So, for example, in 1951, fish were sucked from a large lake in northwestern Macedonia and then fell from the sky. In 2010, in Lajamanu, a town in north-central Australia, some spangled perch fell from the sky. And in Marksville, Louisiana, on October 23rd, 1947, fish fell from the sky at a density of 1 per square yard. It's like about a square meter in some areas.
Wow.
And at Magnolia Terminal in Thomasville, Alabama, on June 28th, 1957, thousands of small fish, frogs, and crayfish fell from the sky while a tornado passed some 15 miles to the south.
It'd be hard not to see that as a religious sign.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, how would you not at the time? So the frogs got special attention because of religious significance, basically. So how does this work? A water spout sucks up an object, and that object can be up to 1 meter, 3 feet below the surface. So if a shark is hiding from a storm, it's probably not getting sucked up. But if the shark was near the surface, could it at least theoretically be picked up? Well, remember that sharks vary quite a bit in size. Surely a small shark could. But what about large objects? Now, I'm not talking about water spouts anymore. We're going to talk about just normal tornadoes. But still, On May 10th, 1931, a massive tornado in Elgin, Texas, picked up a train, carried it over a mile, and dropped it back on the tracks. This included the locomotive and cars. Eyewitnesses saw the train spinning and twisting in the tornado. The crew that were hiding in the locomotive survived the ordeal.
Whoa!
That's crazy.
Make a movie out of that. Right? That's a real thing.
Yeah, you can get Ian Ziering in it. Train-nado.
Train-nado. He's like, why are you in scuba gear? This is just what I do.
Yeah, they'd just be like having conversations in the train and cool
getting
stuff.
tea.
Oh, yeah. Indeed, tornadoes have been seen picking up many things larger than sharks, such as cows and cars. I believe there's a cow in the movie Twister. As a fan of the Sharknado films, I can't possibly watch something as silly as Twister. At times, livestock that is picked up by the tornado have survived. So I'm a bit surprised to report that actually, yes, theoretically, a Sharknado could happen. Now, this doesn't mean things could play out like in the film, with hundreds of sharks swimming around in this massive tornado, staying there for hours or days at a time, being dropped off in flooded areas, eating innocent and not so innocent bystanders, and even chomping the heads off of many people in mid-flight while spinning around in the tornado. So maybe that's not totally plausible, but it's possible, at least theoretically, that this could happen. I think it probably never has. Probably never will.
But once the shark is airborne, who knows what could happen?
Oh, yeah. It's a whole other ballgame. Now, things get more absurd as the films go on. Movie 4 has a lava-nado, which is full of lava from Yellowstone. Then there's a hail-nado, and then a lightning-nado, and then it hits a nuclear power plant, causing a nuke-nado filled with radioactive sharks. So some of these are more or less silly. The lava would probably cool down quickly enough. Hail, of course, is common in a storm. That's not weird. Oh, it's a storm with hail in it. Oh my god, this is wild. Nuke-nado is just kind of weird. Did the fusion continue in the tornado, or was it the spent fuel? I don't really remember. In movie 5, the Sharknado gets so many sharks in it that it makes a Sharkzilla, which is kind of like Godzilla made of sharks.
A Megatron Shark Godzilla. Excellent, Adam.
Yeah. So at this point, there are supernatural elements such as teleporting Sharknadoes. So it's safe to say that the scientific plausibility isn't really there, but there's other stuff going on. And in the 6th and final movie.
Spoiler alert, I assume.
Yeah, it stars expert movie science debunker Neil deGrasse Tyson as the wizard Merlin. So,
what? He's not a marine biologist. He's an astrophysicist.
Yeah, so I think he attempted to bring some real science into the film, which features time travel, and it refers to a wormhole as an Einstein-Rosen bridge, which at least sounds scientific. But I was like, this language is much more scientific than the other Sharknado films had. I bet Neil deGrasse Tyson had something to do with this.
I mean, it is a term, so that's true, but beyond that.
Mm-hmm. And finally, another tidbit I found while researching this segment. A hurricane has never hit Los Angeles. So a tropical storm, which was previously a hurricane, hit Long Beach in 1939, and the last hurricane to strike Southern California was in 1858. But to me, this isn't really the issue with the film. Right? That's not what was implausible, was that there was a storm in that area. It was more that it picked up sharks and the sharks ate people.
And sharks live, some of them, hundreds of years. So it could be. That one from the 1800s, there's still sharks up there.
Oh, maybe. They're still eating birds and just having a good time.
Just waiting to come down.
They're breeding and whatever.
Exactly.
Finally, another recurring theme in the films is that they blow up the Sharknadoes using bombs, which causes them to dissipate. Now, it's hard to evaluate this claim. While it's possible that a bomb would change the conditions of the tornado, which may help it dissipate, it's hard to predict. And many tornadoes would be too powerful to be deterred. It depends on the size of the bomb and things like that.
Right, or you need a huge bomb, which would cause its own problems.
Oh, yeah. It's like there was much more worse devastation from the bomb that we exploded inside the Sharknado, inside a city.
Yes, we got rid of the tornado. What happened? We had to nuke it.
Yes. So I think that's also the plot of Twisters, the sequel to Twister, which has them blowing them up with bombs. But I think they're little bombs and there's drones, and I don't know. I'm not going to watch this movie. There's no way. I have standards. I only watch Sharknado 1 through 6. Sharknado and its many sequels is a very silly film series. The events portrayed in the films are ridiculous from the start and get even more ridiculous, including cyborgs, robots, surviving re-entry inside a shark, time travel, teleportation, and other magic. At its core, the basic idea that a tornado could have sharks in it appears to actually be plausible, at least theoretically, while the specific scope of this, as the number of sharks, how long they'd travel and survive in the tornado, and that they'd live long enough to attack people afterwards, really stretch that plausibility. But it's fun to think that at the core of these ridiculous films is an idea which actually has a basis in reality and historical fact.
Well said. As I was thinking this whole segment might be ridiculous, which it was.
Yes.
There was the value that it turns out a tornado, or we're going to say hurricane or typhoon, could pick up a shark. And that shark could possibly stay alive, at least temporarily. And then, I don't know, hit a person. And while that's happening, bite the person. Yeah. That seems plausible to me.
Yeah. I was worried that maybe they die, right? Because they can't breathe or whatever. And one other myth I'd heard is like sharks can't swim backwards. They have to swim forward. And apparently that's only some sharks. Some sharks, they can be just fine. Maybe not in a tornado, but...
that's true. Well, we'll see.
We'll see if the Sharknadoes ever show up. That would really scare me if my weather app was like, Sharknado, get some shelter, emergency warning from the government of Canada.
Extreme weather alert, Sharknado.
Sharknado. Like, oh man, I've been waiting for this. Get the chainsaw.
From the knowingly preposterous world of Sharknado to the world of misinformation and influence, I'm going to give a short little book review of Invisible Rulers, The People Who Turn Lies into Reality by Renée DiResta. In trying to understand the world of propaganda, social media, and influence, Renée DiResta is an excellent guide. Done a lot of work analyzing this material, and now she's come up with a book aimed largely at a popular audience, but still filled with lots of interesting academic insights. General note, how fair you think this book is will depend heavily on what you consider to be true. If you think vaccines are generally safe and effective, and Biden won the 2020 election, you'll generally think the book is quite fair. That's my heuristic for you. Yeah. Otherwise, you won't, and will be considered part of some of the problems the rest of us are dealing with. Reading some of the description, Invisible Rulers is an exploration into the way power and influence have been profoundly transformed, and that reveals how a virtual rumor mill of niche propagandists increasingly shapes public opinion. While propagandists position themselves as trustworthy Davids, their reach, influence, and economics make them classic Goliaths. Invisible rulers who create bespoke realities to revolutionize politics, culture, and society. Their work is driven by a simple maxim. If you make a trend, you make it true. Dun, dun, dun. Doesn't that sound nice and dramatic? That phrase, bespoke reality, in this context is the idea that there is, yes, one reality in terms of how a lot of us see the world, objective reality, but because of the social media worlds we inhabit and some of our beliefs, we have our own little unique, special realities. I shouldn't say unique, I should say specialized to you realities, which she calls bespoke realities. And that is generally the description of it, that there are people who might position themselves as on the outside, but they increasingly have a lot of influence. Maybe not the classical influence, but that's not the way the world's going as much as it used to, right? Some of the key themes, you have the rise of digital propaganda, right? So social media platforms and online communities have become breeding grounds for misinformation and propaganda. This is nothing new, but it's gotten worse. And she talks about some of the tactics used by these invisible rulers to amplify falsehoods and create alternative realities. The book actually opens with her explorations about vaccines before the COVID vaccine, the different types of vaccines, and her issues dealing with that as a parent. And she also gives a great parable, we'll say, of a man who was just really into guitar stuff, and he would talk about his guitar and guitar music and so on. And he gained a following through that and a trustworthiness with his audience. And over time, as COVID started to happen, he then started, become more interested in talking about that. And then some of the audience responds to how he's saying it, the more extreme versions, of course. And then he says more extreme content. I'm not really doing a good job here, but over time, over multiple months, multiple years, his content changes from just talking about music to now talking about COVID and maybe you can't trust the government, that sort of thing. And then some of his audience just leaves and other audience members are following him more and more. And some of them they're sort of giving him the feedback, this is more of what they want. And this is the notion of audience capture, right? Where if you have an audience, you, again, over time, maybe even subtly get drifted more towards other topics or ideas you didn't necessarily hold yourself. And over time, then you may come to hold. You might just do it initially for engagement and clout and, of course, money once you start getting income. And then it's hard to let go of that. So then it becomes performative, but then maybe it becomes sincere. So there's all these.
I feel like perverse incentives are one of the big problems with social media.
Totally. Another key theme is the power of virality and how certain narratives just gain traction and become widely accepted. Again, if it's trend, it seems it's true, and it's very hard to fight back because, as what Mark Twain might have said, a lie can go halfway across the world before the truth can even get started. Another theme is weaponizing information. and this is how weaponized information is done in the digital age, affecting political discourse, public trust, and societal norms. She does talk about this happening both like within the country by its own citizens as well as outside. And there's also the battle for truth, of course. We need increasing vigilance and so on. Now, I think it might be useful to have a quick look at the table of contents and share some thoughts related to some of the chapters. My memory is not quite good enough for these chapters being, over an hour or two an audience of them, but I'll quickly share. So I mentioned the Guitar Man, another one, chapter 2, if you make a trend, you make it true, influencers, algorithms, and crowds. Why I thought that was worth highlighting is that she has a sort of a three-part or three-factor model of how a lot of misinformation is spreading across the internet. And that's influencers, algorithms, and crowds all affecting each other, right? So you have influencers acting in a certain way being affected by algorithms and the crowds that they have, and then all three are feedback into each other, right? And so I think that's useful because I think a lot of discussions might only focus on one or maybe even two of these, but they don't usually focus on all three. And I think that's leaving out some of the puzzle pieces for sure. Now, of course, there could be, 8 to 15 or 100 variables, but the human brain doesn't like looking at 20 variables. It doesn't work. So 3 is nice for the moment. We definitely know algorithms drive what you see. We also know influencers have influence, but the crowd dynamic is a bit of the demand side of this, that people want to see certain content, and that will then shape their own algorithm, which we already know, but it can affect the algorithms of others, what's trending, right, that day, but also then affects the influencer themselves, right? This is the feedback mechanism there. There's also gurus, besties, and propagandists, how influencers shape culture, politics, and society, an overview of a lot of how wellness stuff has influenced things. The besties is critical there because a lot of people they don't get their opinions from their friends, but they're heavily influenced by generally what their friends believe. And it turns out it's not that everyone's directly influenced by news per se. It's that someone who's very influential in a network may be consuming certain news and then passes that on to their friend group. This is loosely can be thought of as a trusted messenger type idea. There's also more focus on the crowd, contagion, consensus, and the power of the collective. By the way, she bounces around, especially in this chapter and other ones, between the sort of the present and the historical. I found that useful. You get a bit on the Salem witch trials, something else that happened hundreds of years ago. Certainly these things aren't new at all, especially certain insights into media and how the world spreads information in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. There's a lot of great insights throughout that.
It's sort of like, here's the normal state of affair. Here's how a human brain interacts. Here's how a person interacts with certain things.
Totally.
And now here's how weird our world is and how the same things
right. So
create such a different effect.
So it might even be called like the 2-step flow of communication, right? Where it goes to one person and they spread it to someone else versus just going directly to the person. Chapter 5 is propagating the big lie. Yes, that's all about the 2020 election and the issues surrounding that. 6 is agents of influence, which I quite like. This is all about foreign state actors trying to affect and shape public opinion in the United States. You could say there's a huge omission here where she does nothing in terms of coverage of American influence operations in other countries. American person writing for American audience. But yes, I could accept it because I don't expect that in this particular book. But if you're going to cite Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent several times, which she does, and that book is largely about how the American government was trying to mislead the American people, you could also highlight that America, of course, engages in influence operations. We just don't like to talk about as much when we're singling out other people's problems, right? Then you have viruses, vaccines, and virality. Again, that's a lot about COVID and other things. The title of chapter 8 is The Fantasy Industrial Complex. And this is how all of these things combining are leading people to have different types of realities, which become increasingly difficult. And it's not just some people online. That's a repeated message here, that when a lot of misinformation is spread in the public health domain, I think public health officials, she says, a lot of them thought, well, aren't this just some people online? They don't necessarily have to correct the misinformation, not realizing that you should correct it and you should try to do it as quickly as possible. And one of Renee's recommendations actually is that although scientists reasonably like to figure everything out first, sometimes that takes too long. You might have to go immediately with what you know provisionally. Again, qualify your statements, put out something clear and direct, but just say like, this is not true for these reasons. We'll explore it further and get more detail and so on. Otherwise, if you wait even 48 hours, you might have missed out on the cycle and stuff becomes entrenched. The book does discuss the Twitter files, which, again, some people think is the biggest deal in the world and other people think is a nothing burger. I appreciated her take on it. And it is also worth mentioning that she becomes wrapped up in some of this stuff in terms of Matt Taibbi's coverage or other authors and other people, because the perspective certain people are taking on the Twitter files and censorship and so on are then becoming aligned with Republican political figures. So they become involved in congressional testimony where the organization Renee works for is being subpoenaed, then she has to testify, and it becomes much more than, again, just some people on the internet may be saying something that's not substantiated or misleading. As she has said more than one place and in the book, the evidence they're using against her sometimes is cutting an email in half, completely removing context. And it does seem, again, she built good faith on my end. I think she's more likely to be correct than these other people who are misleading her. And I'm sure has all the notes you can check if you want. And so it does seem like a lot of people were really working hard on shaping a certain narrative. That's not to say that certain aspects aren't true, but a lot of the stuff that made even larger headlines of, again, like the nefarious plot of to do XYZ just really wasn't there. She also highlights that, yes, when people are thinking of other people having nefarious invisible ruler attacks against them, usually you need a figurehead, you need a face, right? Because it can't just be distributed systems where people are just acting the way they do. So she became a bit of the figurehead for the movement of bad person doing bad things amongst certain right-leaning people. A refrain that she comes back to in terms of how she understands or thinks we should think about these things is freedom of speech, not freedom of reach. This one makes sense to me as well, because the First Amendment in the States does protect people from certain censure, but it is also the case that is a government-based provision, and a private company can do not everything it wants to do, but does not have to respect free speech principles in that way. This is Section 230. Some people think it's too lenient, some people don't. The point is that they allowed the platforms to not be sued repeatedly and to at least have content on their platform more easily. And this makes a lot of sense to me. I think there's a weird thing going on here where people, again, certain people who usually don't want a lot of government intervention now are sort of suggesting that government should make it so the platforms don't moderate people on their platforms as the company sees fit, which is an interesting belief to hold. Again, people can be nuanced, be like, so you're supporting more government intervention in private companies? Well, wait. And of course, everyone wants more moderation of the other group, right? So she's not just left-leaning. Everyone does it, and there's problems on all sides here for sure. I also thought her take on the public square idea was useful, because people say, oh, it's a new public square, which is why it's different and why certain provisions of freedom of speech should apply. And she's just like, well, no, that's not true at all. If you go to an actual public square, it's very different than an online square. There's issues of how we act and function. There's like time, place, and manner restrictions. You can't do anything you want in a public square. You can't yell at your neighbor following down the street in a public square. You can't yell at somebody at them. Like, this is just not acceptable behavior. There are social norms as well as then actual laws against some of this action if it were to be carried out in a public square. What to do? The whole last chapter is like, what can be done about this? And I'll just give you a few of those ideas here. Greater transparency regarding why things are flagged or banned online would be useful for everyone, because almost everyone thinks the other group is getting away with things and their side is not. Like, show us, even give us some examples why you might be banning someone or shadow banning them, right?
She also wouldn't be a shadow ban if there's transparency.
Well, that's true. Well, you could have an example of why someone theoretically might be, right? I think she also thinks that, yes, usually you don't remove someone entirely, but you downweight or downvote or, make it so the algorithm doesn't promote their content as much. And this goes a bit to the ads as well. That's what they did for some anti-vax stuff. And yes, there's some regulation where government could have a role in nudging some of these forward one way or another. It's broadly trying to increase your own digital sort of civic literacy here. When you understand better how the platforms work, you can see how you might be being manipulated either by people on the platform or by the platform itself. And that is of great value. And so there's a broader issue, of course, like how do we deal as a society with more, right? That's what's happened. There's this flood of information. There's the increasing amounts of content all over the place. Attention is the scarce resource. And a lot of us are drowning, really, in how to allocate attention to certain things that we consider meaningful or not. And so there could be a lot more insight and education and thinking about that sort of thing. And with any sort of intervention to be sophisticated and study what might work and not just assume it would. She gives an example where there were some attempts to reduce people's polarization, say on Facebook, and they were removing sort of political posts and that sort of thing. And all it did was reduce people's time on Facebook. It did not reduce their polarization. So the normal, good scientific idea that, this seems like it might be a good idea. Like, well, yes, try it out first. And it may not actually work the way you want. Certain communities may become really entrenched and have become really entrenched. So changing that now may be very difficult, but things could always get worse. So mitigating that is a good idea. And my general thought for everyone is that when you are interacting with these systems, just think about whose goals are being served here. Is this really something that you want for yourself, engaging in these conversations to achieve an end? Or could it be, again, the platform wants you to spend time on it. Someone else wants your attention. Foreign governments want you to feel outraged and to click on that. So there's a lot of other people's interests being served by some of our activities, and we should be mindful of that.
Very interesting book. I'm only about 2/3 through it, so I don't want to make strong comments. I have some concerns about the author's bias, but she's kind of talking about the things she's familiar with, so maybe it's kind of fine. I'm generally like a anti-moderation censorship type of person. I think this goes back to like my early days on message boards, fighting with message board moderators and things like this. But so whenever she comes up with suggestions like just deboost it and whatever, and I feel like there's a bit of like, well, you just want them to like not spread the content you don't like. But I think everyone kind of feels that way. So I don't know what the perfect solution to this kind of thing is. There are obvious problems. And awareness is important, and I'm generally a big advocate of like fight bad information with good information, but that's not always practical, I think, in the extreme.
Right. Or that a lot of what gets attention as bad information is very engaging.
Yes.
And a lot of sort of sciencey, public health, government people, like, as she said, the message they put out are boring. And so, yes, in theory, good information can be bad information, but in reality, it's very hard to have that occur. When this comes out, Renée would have been on Sam Harris's podcast about a month ago. And in that, they both sort of say, well, like every website has some sort of moderation policy or guidelines, even 4chan. And so there's a world where like, oh yeah, everyone understands there needs to be something here, right? And if not that, then there are actually laws against, saying you might kill people and so that sort of thing, right? So there is something, and it's just a matter of how much and for who, right? But I thought it was very useful. In a way, I wanted something a little bit more academic, but as the book went on, I just thought this is very useful, almost as an exploration of recent history. If you aren't in the social media space as much, like some of my friends who are part of a book group, they're like, wow, all this is going on. This is really disheartening. I'm like, oh yes, you're lucky you haven't been on the internet as much.
Yeah, I heard a lot of these already. Right, so maybe not the specifics though.
Right. Yeah. It sort of depends which communities you hang out in. So I think it's generally a very solid book for the time, especially. Well, thanks for joining us once again. Adam explored how Sharknadoes are going to get you. They really will. Be careful.
Yeah, close your windows and get a chainsaw ready.
And I talked about the book Invisible Rulers, which I recommend. Until next time, think better, act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian... Take two. And Adam is going to... Sorry, what is it? Sharknado?
Sharknado.
No, but what?
The science of Sharknado.
There we go, sorry. Take it away, Shark Boy.
Shark Boy and Lava Girl. This is a different kind of movies. My son watches those too. So, if you really set the mood right, maybe you get a shark and a tiger.
What? What? Is that your conclusion?
There's no way.
As you just said, by definition, species cannot interbreed and produce fertile offspring. They can't interbreed.
I'm just wondering if they could copulate. I probably can cut that. Okay.
I just feel like they can copulate, Adam.
Okay, another fun thing about this
special. Second, where did the tiger shark get his name?
Oh, it has stripes. I didn't say that.
No, you didn't. You're focused on the copulation.
I was like, all right, we're done talking about sharks and tigers.
Raising my suspicions about this segment from the get-go.